Hamas had effectively 18 years to run the Gaza. And that's the time that it takes from the birth of a child to the end of their formal education. And in 18 years, they could have presided over and produced a generation of young Gazans who were productive for their people, for their society, for their neighbors, for the rest of the world. And they didn't. They spent 18 years indoctrinating the children of Gaza into a death cult and into a genocidal hatred, which obviously was most dangerous to the Israelis, but it was obviously disastrous for the people of Gaza. And there's just, if you speak to soldiers who were there in 2014 when Hamas started a war again, one of a set of rounds of war since 2005. If you speak to the soldiers who were there in 2014 going house to house and who were also involved in the war since 2003, they all say the same thing, which is the marked radicalization of the Gazan population. The marked increase in it's so banal in a way to even cite it, but like the numbers of copies of Mein Kampf in Arabic in an average Gazan household, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. There are so many what ifs and other paths that Hamas could have taken, but that was the one they took. They decided to take the path of using their time in power to build up their infrastructure, radicalize the population, and encourage them to believe that they could destroy the state of Israel. And then on October the 7th, they gave it their best shot. And by the way, there is no organized collective punishment of the citizens of Gaza. Collective punishment would just be dropping bombs with no purpose across civilian areas, carpet bombing, this sort of thing. This is simply not what the IAF and the IDF have done since the 7th. They have been fighting a house-to-house war against this terrorist group. They do aerial strikes. Gaza is very, very badly beaten up. The buildings, the infrastructure that existed. There aren't many buildings standing. But this is not the result of just wild and imprecise bombing by the Israelis. It's been extremely concerted. It's extremely difficult. But when people say, well, this must be collective punishment, I think that the people who say that, simultaneously, that's not true. And also, there is not a hostage who's come out President Trump made this point recently. There is not a hostage who's come out who I've spoken with who found any Gazan Palestinian who expressed even the slightest human kindness to them. If you look at the footage from the 7th that Hamas recorded themselves of them taking young Jewish women into Gaza and so on, you will notice that the trucks and the motorbikes and so on are not stopped by horrified Gazan civilians saying, why have you got this Israeli girl whose tendons you've cut, and why are you bringing her here? It's all celebration. It's all celebration. And it's the same there's a couple of cases of hostages who managed to escape from the civilian houses they were being held in, who were immediately returned by the citizens they met.
Yeah, the celebration, I do wonder what percent of the population they represent, but there's something really dark. There's several ways to explain the celebration. It could be that there's a deep indoctrination where you do legitimately hate Jews. And there also could be a place of just deep desperation. And it's a kind of relief that you have to convince yourself that you're on the side of fighting for freedom in order to justify to yourself that this is the right way to fight out of desperation, out of extremely harsh conditions. Because the way we're kind of speaking about this with the celebration, it's very easy to project a kind of evil on the populace that I just am very hesitant to project, especially on the general populace.
You don't have to project it onto them. You can just listen to their own words. What I'm sure you've heard one of many audio recordings you hear from the morning, but I'm sure you've heard the audio recording of the young man who ends up in one of the communities in the south of Israel and calls back home. Have you heard that?
Yes, I've heard it.
I quoted in the first chapter of the book. He calls back home and he says to his father, who picks up, it's on WhatsApp. I think he's on the phone. He's saying, "Turn on to WhatsApp because I can show you." He says, "I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Oh, father, your son has killed 10 Jews." And his father is saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" He goes, "I want to show you, Dad. I want to show you. I've killed Jews with my own hands. Your son." Put mother on the phone. Mother comes on the phone. The brother comes on the phone. This is one of many, many stories from the day that suggest something which I would say is not just indoctrination, but yes, evil.
First of all, those phone calls are somehow uniquely horrific. But I've also heard recordings of phone calls made by Ukrainian soldiers to their parents and Russian soldiers to their parents. And they have not as intense and not as horrific, but they have a similar nature to them, which there's an aspect of war where you dehumanize the other side, right?
Sure.
In order to fight that war. So we have to remember that that element is going to be there in a time of war, in a time of desperation.
It would be a strange type of simple sort of, I don't know, pride in war to go into an 80-year-old woman's house and kill her on her floor and then film her dead body and her body in its final moments and send it round to all of that woman's friends on her phone, on her Instagram account. You may have heard different things from me, but I mean, I would be surprised if there were even the most vociferous of Russian soldiers phoning back home to Moscow and saying, "Mom, you won't believe my luck. I managed to rape and kill this 80-year-old woman." That's quite unusual, even in warfare. And that's one of the things about Hamas and what I describe as the death cult types, which makes them different from other people.
But that's the channeling of evil and hatred and anger in the human spirit, but that doesn't make that person evil.
No, I disagree.
You commit that once.
I think that there is such a force as evil in the world, and I think it can descend and it can be used. And it's very hard to find a non-theological way to talk about this, but of everything I've seen, there are actions that people like Hamas committed on the 7th that cannot be described as anything other than evil. The things that happened at the Nova party were especially appalling. I mean, it was all appalling, but it was especially appalling because, first of all, it's a sort of party which people like you and I, or at least you and I when we were younger, might have been at. And so everyone knows, the world of a dance party and all night, rave in the desert to commune with nature and the universe and to take some psychedelics and to, expand your consciousness and your love and all of that sort of thing. The fact that people doing that at 6:30 in the morning then encountered people coming in to the party on trucks and military vehicles and just massacring them and raping them. And I mean, I give examples of the first-hand accounts of people who survived, but I mean, it's beyond belief of almost anything else I've covered in war. And it's because it seems so, I mean, an army facing another army is one thing. A terrorist group in civilian clothing facing an army is another thing. But a terrorist group facing a group of young people at a dance, unarmed, and doing what they did is pretty hard to comprehend unless you use the lexicon of evil somewhere.